Okay, today we are going to talk about building components. So I'm going to share a screen here and hopefully we'll be able to see this somewhere here. Da, da, da. Still not sharing. All right, hopefully you can see my PowerPoint presentation here, and we're going to slide into the slideshow on this. So I developed this as a kind of a new agent training PowerPoint several years ago. For those of you that don't know, I'm a licensed builder, which may continue for the next couple months until renewal comes up. But as of right now, yes, I'm still a licensed builder. So what I did is I just wanted, I think it's important that people are familiar with what they're selling. And because the age of homes over the years has, Grand Rapids has, and West Michigan in general, has a very diverse population of different architectural styles, ages of homes. And so there's different building methods during different eras of construction. And so when you walk into a house, if it's brand new, that's going to look differently from a structural standpoint and a physical standpoint than if you were to walk into a 120-year-old house that was built turn of the century. So the challenge is, how do we speak intelligently about that to our clients as we're walking through and showing homes without saying too much from a liability standpoint? Like, we don't want to point at the roof if we don't know the roof age and say, yeah, I think that's going to last you 10 years, because then you've made a warranty that you just can't deliver on. So, and trust me, that kind of stuff happens. So, we always want you to err on the side of caution and say, hey, and I tell people this too, like, I'm a licensed builder, but I didn't build this house, so I don't know how it was built. But there's certain things that we could point out, physical aspects of it, things that we see that we should know about. And with our philosophy at Keller Williams, always seek first to understand. So if you don't know the answer to something, or if somebody asks you a question that you're just not comfortable answering, say, hey, if we get this under contract, an inspector can tell you more about that. Or also, let me get you an answer on that, and reach out to the Facebook group here. First, call me as your broker, or reach out to agents that you're on your team, or your team leader on your team as well. So without further ado, we will get started. So we start with the ground up. We always talk about, hey, it's got to have good bones. Well, what does that mean? Starts with the foundation. Is it level? Is it cracked? What type is it? And so this list here is kind of a encompassing list of things that you would have your foundations made from. You get into the old Heritage Hill homes. We were in one on College Avenue earlier this week that has a stone foundation. You have concrete, poured concrete. You have concrete block or cinder blocks. You can be built on a slab or a crawl space with any of these types of materials. And then also, you may not run into it all that much, but I know some of the builders out there like Sable are using what are called SIPs now. And those are structural insulated panels. And so you'll see like an I-beam of concrete coming out with some insulation foam board in between them. And that can also be precast off-site, bought in panels. And then there's also such thing as a wood foundation. Don't see a lot of those around here. I think I've seen 2 in my entire career in West Michigan in 22 years now. But you will on occasion look at a foundation and see studded wall with treated plywood as your foundation wall. So everything carries risk. We know that. So you may look at stone, 2-foot wide foundation, and go, my gosh, it's been there for 120 years. Where's it going? But on the interior, mortar can sand out, and we'll go through that in a little bit too. All right. So then you have, this is kind of a good example of a stone foundation. And so if you look at that, you can see that just field stone, mortar in between, but then what are we getting into down here? I've got dirt exposed. And so a lot of times they would do a earthen shelf that they put a skim coat of concrete on and then build like a 4-foot stone wall up. This over time is okay, but not great from a structural standpoint. It can settle. And one of the things that you'll look for on a lot of these stone foundations is that mortar in there through the years has gathered enough moisture, released enough moisture, and it's just sandy to the touch, and that sand will just fall right off of there. And so then that can result in the stones coming loose. So one of the things you want to look for is, piles of sand on the concrete floor, missing mortar, things like that. It can be skim coated, can be fixed, but something to look out for there. Now, concrete block, used a lot on the lakeshore. And I don't know if that's because the sandy soil composition over there or not, or just the makeup of the builders over there. You will see it obviously in Grand Rapids as well, and throughout West Michigan. But so the things you want to look out for with a concrete block foundation is what we call buckling, or, it's like a backfill problem when they go to push dirt back in around the foundation. And poured concrete can have this too, but along this lateral line right here, you'll see kind of a buckle. So this pushes in if it's improperly filled, and you'll see a gap here. And then you'll also get what's called step cracking. And so with step cracking, that's where you get a little bit of settling, and you'll see like a jagged right along the mortar line, just a crack down along the steps there of the mortar joints. Those, again, that could have happened 10 minutes after they backfilled. It could have happened 10 years, 100 years. It's not for us to say. Everything can be fixed. Just matters how many dollars and zeros are on the check, as I always say. So, but if that wall isn't straight vertically, or you start seeing that step cracking, and look for, if those concrete walls are painted, look for extra caulk that's been painted over in those mortar joints. Look for, you can kind of see it gobbed on there, or if it's unpainted, a different color of mortar. And you'll see some repairs there, and just make sure that you're not seeing any staining. And I think this next slide shows that as well, what we call efflorescence. And so here's a good example of step cracking. Here's that lateral buckle that we see. You can see here that support right there is actually bowing in, and that's kind of from that backfilling process as well. So just something to keep an eye out for when you go through and look at the foundation. Now, here is a modern foundation. This has your poured walls. You can see that there's a membrane, or this is probably a spray-on tar material that waterproofs that from the outside. Most new construction nowadays has perimeter drains at least on one side of this, either on the interior or the exterior of the home, to allow water to flow away. So obviously, as time goes on, we've learned things. And so, the thing you want to look for in poured concrete is jagged cracks. Again, you can see like along this, you'd see like a crack starting up here and going down to this corner, and one of equal kind of size and depth coming from this corner down to this window. That could indicate maybe that corner has settled a little bit. Again, it's not our job to play structural engineer. It's our job to visually see things, point things out, and then make sure that the buyer is aware of what we're seeing. If you know specifically, like it's your listing, that water comes pouring in there as soon as you get a half inch of rain, should be disclosed whether the seller did or not. If it's something that you've observed, maybe you were there last week during a rainstorm and show the house, and you saw water pouring in, showing it to a different buyer this week, and probably should be disclosed. Hey, I was in here last week, saw water pouring in. That's your job. So then on top of that, you have framing types. And so now, wood is at a premium. So there's energy codes that need to be met. So you have different types of framing, and now you have modular and manufactured homes that are built on site versus stick built, 2x4 versus 2x6 framing. And so there's always going to be a little bit of changes going on there. You do have some engineered wood framing now. We were at a commercial conference last week and they talked about mass timber, where they're making building panels out of laminated timber now that has a strength of concrete and steel. So you're going to see that in some commercial buildings. So with a modular home, and again, the MLS, your fellow agents out there, you have to understand the difference between modular, manufactured, and site-built homes. And then there's also this kind of hybrid version called panelized construction. But a modular home is built off-site. It's brought in on a truck in several pieces. It has some traditional framing methods to it, but it's then joined together. So you might see like three or four pieces of half of the home brought together, and then they join it. And so when you go in the basement of one of these homes, you're going to see kind of a joining plate. You'll look and see two beams down the center of the house and a joining plate there versus one main beam running down the center of the house. That's a good indication that it is modular. Now, a mobile is brought in one piece framework, maybe two, because sometimes double wide would qualify, but typically it comes in, it's got a framework, a metal framework underneath it like a car does. It's titled like a car. There's a plate on it, has a VIN number like a car. And I have this term on here, highly unfinanceable. So little tricky, can be done. The one thing that most lenders require is that is the only site that mobile has been on. Just simply because you get the shifting and heaving. I'm sure if you're going to take it off one site, move it to another. And I think that's why they do that. So there's a thing called an affidavit of a fixture that should be available during the financing process to prove that it's there as the only site that it's been on. And if you don't have that, then you have to hire a structural engineer to go out and verify that it's in good enough shape to be financed. So more on mobiles, and real quick, you realize too that you can't list and sell a mobile home in a mobile home park, because that is not attached to the land. The landowner owns the land underneath it. Mobile homeowner pays rent to that, almost like a lot fee. And so that's a separate license. There are a couple people in town that do that. So, so stick built, we have it down here, 2x4 versus 2x6 construction. So one thing to look for, and again, I usually have a tape measure in my car. I don't carry it into a house with me, but if you look at the depth of which the window framing is, and so if I'm walking through the living room of a house or the dining room, and I look at the windows, I can usually tell the depth of a 2x4 is 3.5, and then you've got some sheathing and some siding on one side and drywall on the other. That's going to add up to about 6 inches. Well, if you have a 2x6 construction, which allows for more insulation between the walls, obviously different strength than a 2x4, you can build differently with it, taller walls. That is going to have more depth. And so just the depth from the interior wall to the window would be probably about 3 or 4 inches of itself. And so you can kind of gauge that. A lot of times in the listing description, it's going to say 2x6 construction. And so that's a good thing, obviously. More insulation, sturdier build, should be a little more energy efficient and easier to heat and cool financially and whatnot. So not that you're going to go rip apart walls and look for 2x4s versus 2x6s. So, so with HVAC systems, you have different furnace types. We have water heaters, AC, and other ventilation systems that would make up your HVAC system. So obviously, age of the furnace is a big thing, and the different types of furnaces that go along with it. Well, we all should know what a gas forced air furnace is. That's typically about a 3.5 foot to 4 foot tall metal box in the basement. Has a different energy efficiency level, but would have the AC unit in with it, with a coil going in. So there's little things that you can look for there, versus a gravity feed furnace, which comes in an older house, a boiler, things to look for with as far as oil fired versus propane, versus natural gas and or wood. So now with a forced air furnace, you have two different types of efficiency level. You have the high efficiency type where you see just white PVC pipes coming out. They're usually about 2 or 3 inches coming out of the furnace, and they vent outside, versus the traditional 80% efficiency furnace, which is usually a metal stove pipe coming out, and that'll be tied into the chimney somewhere. So that's something that you can point out to your buyers and say, hey, this is, high efficiency furnace. You'll learn over time the age of furnaces by the color that they are. So, and there's no like chart that says, hey, tan is 20 to 30 years old, or light gray versus dark gray, or aqua, there's no color coding on that, but you'll be able to soon tell, size and shade of color of these furnaces are all fairly similar based on the year that they're produced. And so, if I'm seeing a tan furnace in the basement, then I'm probably going to guess that it's at least 20 years old, because most everything's been light gray or dark gray in the past few years. So a gravity furnace, you're not going to mistake that for anything else other than it is. That's about 4.5 feet across, has big giant 1 foot ductwork pipes going into it. And that works, and they can be oil or gas fired, but that works on, is simply what it says, gravity. So we know that cold air sinks. So your big giant cold air returns in your older houses that are in the floor, usually about 1.5 feet by 2 to 3 feet wide. That cold air pushes down, goes into those big pipes, and pushes hot air out. And so there was no blower fan. It was just worked on thermodynamics. And the fact that the cold air sank into the furnace and pushed the hot air out. Haven't seen one of those in a very long time. There's still a few exist. You can usually see the remnants of them in the floor of the old houses that they were put in, because there's usually some sort of circle in the concrete floor that shows that it was sitting there. So boiler heat, very efficient. Some people really like it because it doesn't blow a lot of dust like a forced air furnace does. But remember that AC would need to be added separately if it hasn't been already, into an attic system or through a mini split or something like that. And this presentation is probably old enough where we don't even get into ductless splits, or what we call mini splits on here. So those are those little Mitsubishi units that sit on the wall and have a small fan box condenser unit outside, and you can control them with a remote control, and they are like a heating and AC unit all in one just for that room. So oil, the thing to know about oil is it's a distinct smell. If the tank is in the basement, you can't miss it. It's about 80 gallons at least, sitting there on 4 kind of stilts, and usually as a pipe coming from outside, because the oil truck would pull up and fill it. It's still rather common out on the East Coast. Thing you have to be aware of is that buried oil tanks outside the home, keep an eye out, because typically on the front of the house, they would have a filler pipe, which is about 3 inches in diameter with a little metal cap on it. And then an air vent pipe, which is about an inch, inch and a half around. Kind of looks like a microphone sticking up out of the ground. Buried oil tanks are kind of a health hazard, especially when you have well water. If those leak, they can contaminate a well. Just something to keep an eye out for there. And they should be removed if they are not being utilized. So wood, obviously, hard to get financing on a home that has just wood heat. simply because it's not a consistent enough heat source where if you leave town for 2 weeks and all of a sudden it freezes and nobody's there to stoke the wood fire, that you would be able to prevent the pipes from freezing. So if it's only wood heat, you may have to actually add an external heat source. And that could be as simple as adding some baseboard heaters into the house. Electric baseboard heat's pretty easy to install with a minimum temperature. So then the lender looks at that and goes, hey, at least we got something to keep that'll kick on and keep the pipes from freezing. So same thing with external wood burning furnaces. Haven't sold a lot of these myself, or homes with them, I should say, because they do have a very short lifespan. So if you ever drive through the countryside, you'll see these little shed box type things that sit there and have a stovepipe coming out, and they're in the wintertime, they're obviously churning a lot of smoke out. And, they can be pelletized burning material. So you can go and get these bags of pellets that burn, automatic feed. And they are basically a external boiler. And so they're heating either some sort of gel component or water through a system. Well, not only again is that tough from a financing perspective, but also they have a very short lifespan because they corrode, there's a lot of heat, and you have moisture falling on it, and they get rather corroded on the inside and can rust out rather quickly. So I would recommend that if you are selling a house with one of these types of furnaces, and again, you get a half hour outside the city, and you're going to see quite a few of these things because they're fairly cheap to install and cheap to run compared to filling a propane tank on a regular basis. But have it inspected by somebody that sells these or installs these to give you a really good, solid once over on the thing. Because, you could be into this for 6 months and have to replace that. And they're not cheap, relatively speaking. They're just cheaper to operate. And so with air conditioning types, you have central air, obviously. You would have a condenser unit that sits outside. You would have the window units, those are obviously easily seen if you're walking through a house during the summertime. And then you also have attic fans. Now, an attic fan is kind of telltale. It's not always in a 2-story house. Just a lot of homes built in the 50s and 60s had them, where you'll walk through the hallway, there'll be like a 2 foot by, probably 3 foot by 3 foot square with a metal frame, usually a wall switch, maybe with a timer. And you just turn this thing on for like 20, 30 minutes and it just sucks all the hot air out of the house. And so like if you have a shady neighborhood with a brick ranch house and one of these attic fans, you really don't need central air because it'll just cool that house down so quickly. So again, a lot of those are older units. You don't see a lot of them put in new nowadays. There are replacement units you can get, but my recommendation would be, especially in the wintertime, if you're walking through a house, don't flip the switch on these things because maybe central air has been added. We don't know if people utilize these things. A lot of people will cover them with some sort of box or sheet of heavy foam board insulation to keep the cold air out during the wintertime. And so you start turning that on when it's not really supposed to be turned on. You could damage components. And so let the inspector do that when you go through if you see one of those. So it's interesting. I have new requirements down here. And so one thing, I had my central air replaced several, what's it been, 3 years ago now, I guess. And I know it was pre-COVID, so maybe it was as far back as 2018. But the coolant, I can't use Freon anymore. And so you're going to a bigger unit with a different coolant requirement. So if you're getting into a building inspection and they say, oh, you need a recharge on the air conditioning unit, know that some of that material is no longer available and older AC units may become obsolete and need to be replaced. So just because they say it's working, doesn't mean it doesn't come without cost down the road for your clients. And again, I mean, you can do all kinds of research, just Google new air conditioning requirements and see the availability of whatever materials they're using. And there's some technical jargon for that, which I don't have memorized right now. So again, we're not trying to make anybody a licensed builder today. So other parts of the HVAC would be exhaust fans, those are bath fans, hood vents over stoves, dryer vents. And then, like I said, with high efficiency, you're going to have power venting on water heaters with a PVC pipe versus a stove pipe, same as your furnace appliance. And, not too expensive. The thing about exhaust fans in older homes, they didn't actually vent them outside. A lot of times they just went into the attic. And so if you think about dumping all that hot, damp air coming out of the shower into your attic, where it's cellulose insulation, wood decking, hot environment in the summer, it's just a mold growth, like giant petri dish up there. So a lot of times you get these inspection reports, and that's what leads to mold in the attic a lot of times is that venting. And so it's really simple to fix. You just pop a hole in the roof, put in a stove, little vent, and then tie that vent line to that so it pumps that warm, moist air out of the attic. Can be done through the gable end of a vent if it's close enough. Like sometimes you'll get gable venting, just tuck it up there, just something to get that air out of there. Dryer vents, you're going to see and again, I'm not going to kill a deal on this, especially in this type of market and environment, but inspectors are going to tell you that it should be either a rigid stove pipe coming out of the dryer or a metal flex vent. You see a lot of this white PVC dryer vent hose, and it's you're really not supposed to use that. But I'm not going to put the fear of God in my clients. I might mention it to them and say, hey, this could come back on an inspection, but that's a $100 fix if you hire somebody to do it, not $1,000 fix either. So with stovepipes and power vents, again, it's you're not going to know whether there's a proper liner in the chimney if it's got a stovepipe. And I always look for a couple things around stovepipes: is corrosion, where a water heater comes down. You can see crumblies coming out of it. Again, you're not the inspector on this, but if it's improperly vented, it's not for you to say. It's just maybe the point of hey, this is something we'd want to have an inspector look at if you're seeing a lot of crumbly stuff or rust or corrosion on a stovepipe. I'm really a big fan of power vent, high efficiency appliances. So it takes all the need for chimneys and metal venting out. So, because with that stovepipe, there's certain, they call it B vent and C vent, it's like a double layer of stovepipe that prevents condensation and would prevent some of that corrosion too. So, but all in the name of safety. So, all right, with roofing, so the thing you want to know about, roof systems in general are, flat roofs are not as good as a higher pitch roof for preventing snow buildup, water intrusion, things like that. And how that venting becomes a component of that, and then what types of roofing lead to what types of problems and whatnot. So with pitch, a 412 pitch, we say the words, I remember my dad teaching me this whenever we were building his house when I was a kid. It's they talk about rise over run. And so a 412 pitch means it goes 4 feet up for every 12 feet that it goes over. And so a 412 pitch is kind of the minimum pitch that you should have on a roof. The steeper it gets, the more it sheds water, the more it sheds snow, less buildup you have. And with a 412 pitch with a highly snowy area, you get 3 foot snow drift up there. You're kind of pushing some load limits on that. The other thing is the number of layer of shingles. I don't think it's even code anymore. And again, I'd have to go back and check that, but I don't think it's code anymore to just shingle over something. You should be tearing the shingles off. And so you can look on the edge. If that drip edge, which is that little metal strip at the edge of the shingles, is a different color than like your soffit and your fascia, then that's a good idea that there's probably 2 layers of shingles on there.
Okay.
Nowadays, they do a little bit better job. But again, rely on your inspectors to go up there and tell you that, not you to get up and pull the roof apart and figure that out. But I mean, sometimes you can look at the edge of a roof and see, 2 or 3 layers of shingles, and it's like that's a weight issue on there. So
my old boss just recently, I think she might have bought it actually, but it had three things of shingles on it.
yeah. There was one in Heritage Hill that we sold. It was a big multi-unit. Buyer told me when they went to re-roof it, there were 3 layers of shingles that they pulled off, and then there was a layer of cedar shake underneath all that. It's like how that all didn't collapse, I don't know, but sometimes it's kind of like if you lean enough stuff up against each other, then maybe it holds together. So
I wasn't even thinking about like a weight issue though. Like that's pretty interesting.
yeah, that definitely becomes a labor issue too when you go to remove it all. So.
Yeah, right.
When it comes to venting, and again, the venting serves a purpose for it's kind of like you want to keep in the summertime, you want to keep the hot air in the attic, and in the wintertime, you want to keep the cold air in the attic. And so if you don't have good venting and to let that air move through there, then you're going to get ice dams. You're going to get shingles that bake and curl, shortening the life of the shingle. And so at a bare minimum, if we think about, I'm going to scroll through my slides here a little bit. This is a good graphic on how the air system works within from an airflow standpoint. So if you have soffit vents, this is the soffit of your overhang here, that should be vented. So airflow, if it's a hot day, is going to flow up through here, and it'll pull the cooler air up in through there, and then exit the hot air out the top, either through a can vent. They call these little pot vents. You'll see them on the back of a house, little shiny metal things about a foot square, lets the air out. Sometimes it can be a power fan. It could be like a cylinder that sits there and spins a little bit. That is really good. Then came along in more modern times what's called the ridge vent. And so if you see this little mini roof over the roof here at the very peak, that's a ridge vent, and that lets air out through there. A gable vent, you can see here, sometimes they're a little bit more up towards the peak, but if they're in this position, it's not great, because without a ridge vent, this whole area here isn't really being served. And so that could lead to quicker wear on your shingles up there as well. Ice damming occurs in the wintertime when you don't have good venting, because the heat rises out of the house, and instead of exiting, it builds up here, and then you get this freeze thaw cycle. And if you have gutters on the house, that snow, even if you don't, you'll get icicle drip here, and then it refreezes, and it goes back up under the shingles and can penetrate the roof line and then also the walls. And so that's why venting is important. Again, not an inspector, not a builder, but if you see a house, and some houses just don't have soffits, like you'll just see like maybe a 4-inch soffit here, should have at least some little disc vents in there to be able to create airflow. If not, just maybe point that out and say, hey, look, this is something that without an overhang or without vented soffits here, you're not going to have the roof last as long. So, or it could lead to some ice damming.
So the venting has more to do with that than like even insulation?
Well, it all works together. So obviously you have to have good insulation to keep the heat from coming out of this portion of the house here. But you also need ventilation to assist that air to escape.
Okay. My house has this problem. That's why I'm asking. I noticed in the wintertime that like you can see almost like the outline of like a square outline in my roof that tells me that it's just not insulated well. Heat's just escaping,
Yep.
So
what you
I need to
don't
work on
you don't want to see insulation up here, because what that does is it traps more heat in here. And what you want is your insulation layer to be here at the ceiling level.
yeah.
All uninsulated up here. Now, the other challenge is if you have, people go up and go, oh yeah, I blew in like 12 more inches of insulation. It's a ton of insulation up there. But if they don't have baffles in here, which are little styrofoam trays that go
Right.
with the rafters to create an air channel, and they just fill this with insulation, then you're blocking the airflow again. So
Yep, I gotcha.
see that a lot. I mean, any Tom, Dick, or Harry, or Jane, or whoever could go and rent an insulation blower on a weekend from Lowe's and 40 bags of insulation. If they don't know what they're doing, they're not helping themselves any. So
Right.
kind of goes back to one of my sayings. I've been saying this my whole career is not everybody should be allowed inside Home Depot. Allow with some good ideas or think they know what they're doing and can go wrong in a hurry. So end up costing you more money. So as far as roofing type goes, asphalt shingles still pretty much the most popular. These old 3-tab shingles, I don't even think you can buy these anymore. Maybe as replacements, but they're not putting them on as roofs anymore. You get these architectural grade shingles. There's 25-year and 35-year shingles. You can get a 50-year shingle now. There's some that are a little more earth friendly, some that are more durable. Again, you're not meant to be a shingle expert, but just know that if you see, these old 3-tab shingles are going to look thin. They might be rolled and curled on the edges. Something to look out for there. Cedar shake is actually, I like cedar shake. It's expensive to replace, but it does last a long time. There's clay tile roof. Very few of those in West Michigan. That's more of a Southwest sort of thing, but you will see some clay tile from time and again. Metal roofing is really starting to take off. It's amazing. Some of these areas, I think there's salesmen that are just like in pockets that go out and sell everybody in the same area. For some reason, that happens a lot out in rural areas where you see these metal roofs. They last a long time. At least 50 years, I would say, minimum. It used to be every once in a while you'd see a metal roof on an old farmhouse or something, but now you're seeing quite a few more of them just on regular housing. A rolled roof versus a rubber membrane. So if you're below that 412 pitch on a roof, you should have a some sort of rolled roofing or rubber membrane roof, because a shingle isn't going to shed snow and ice well enough on a low pitch like a 312 or 212 pitch or even a flat roof. You got to have rolled roofing, which is basically one giant shingle they unroll and then seam it with tar, or a rubber membrane, which goes down and then is sealed around the edges. So the roof, like on our office, is a rubber membrane. And those obviously don't last as long, but they're a little more waterproof. There's certain things you can do to them to prolong their life. They make a material you can actually roll on with a paint roller now that will kind of coat them and treat them and make them last a little bit longer. But if you see a lot of flat roofing in the house you're showing, a lot of people love mid-century modern houses, flat, lower slung roof, lower pitch roof, but they come with a little more roofing issues. You see occasionally, I know of maybe one house in Grand Rapids where I've seen a gravel roof on one of those old mid-century modern houses, a little more popular in a commercial application where they put down like tar and membrane and then cover it with gravel. There's living roofs you can buy now where they plant, they put dirt and plants up there to absorb water and sunlight, and environmentally friendly roofing is what that's called. And again, a lot in commercial applications. Haven't seen a lot of that in residential yet. Solar shingles, I think Tesla's, since I've done this presentation, I think Tesla's come out with solar shingles that produce solar energy and can get you a little return on investment there. Not super popular yet due to cost, but so just, again, know types of shingles and kind of what to look for. Again, it's not our job to tell somebody how old the roof is, but if you see an old 3-tab shingle and it looks like they're as thin as paper and the edges are curling up, you can probably pretty much say that you should have an inspector look at that. So kitchens and bathrooms, again, I'm not going to spent a lot of time on this, but as far as different types of cabinetry and countertop and fixtures and whatnot, when I don't know if it's habit or if it's just my buyers or what, it seems like whenever I walk somebody through a house, we always end up opening the drawers of a kitchen cabinet and looking at it. And one thing that I always point out is if you see this on the side where it's like solid wood and what they call a dovetail joint here, that's a solid wood box, good soft close, good rolling drawers, versus if you see particle board here and just a cabinet front stapled on there, probably not going to be as high of a quality of cabinet, and it's probably just going to have a metal runner, probably going to roll a little noisier. So it's try it before you buy it, right? At least open a cabinet or two and see if it's got the soft close drawers and doors, adjustable hinges. Make sure they move. Obviously, you get into a house built in the 50s, they're all site built with plywood, and so you've got these cabinets that basically screech if they're not waxed or whatever, and sometimes a little tough to move, but at that point you're probably wondering whether or not it's worth it to replace them all. So, but amazing to me that all the stuff they used to do right on site at a house without much in the way of power tools either. So countertops, so you have solid surface, which can be, and again, if you walk into Lowe's and you tell them you want solid surface countertops, that's a different product than granite or quartz. And so granite is a slab of rock that comes out of the ground. Quartz is a composite. It'll take pieces of rock and kind of mix it together and make it. And then you have solid surface, which is kind of just a composite material that's made in a factory to kind of make it look like granite and quartz. And so I think here we have a picture. This is probably granite here, and these are quartz countertops here. Concrete countertops are a thing. I used to have a book on it. I thought I was going to corner the market in Grand Rapids on it, and I realized it was just too much of a pain to even make them. But there's actually some cool ones out there. You see a lot of do-it-yourselfers try it. Corian is not as popular anymore. That's just like a white cutting board almost type material. One of my pet peeves with countertops is when people do-it-yourselfer with ceramic tile, and not a bad thing, but I don't like if I think about raw chicken and going into a grout line, how do I sand? It's just, I don't know. It's like one of the things I just point out to my buyers all the time and say, look, this is probably a do-it-yourself project, and here's the hazards of it. But you see them a lot. It's not, there's some that are done okay. And if they use a sandless grout, you can still wipe them down. It's not the end of the world. It's just something I don't like. So, and then wood, like you can go to IKEA now, and most of those are particle board with a wood veneer. Some butcher block out there still in higher end homes, which also carries some health hazards. Very sanitizing, but you can, I suppose you can throw raw chicken on a counter if you don't wipe it down properly. Whatever material it is, you probably could get sick from it. So again, we're not health inspectors either, but just food for thought with people. So as far as flooring goes, I have again, this is a little bit dated, but still accurate. Wood engineered flooring, laminate, and then LVT, and this should probably say LVT, LVP on here, because now it's luxury vinyl tile, luxury vinyl plank is the LVP is now the new term for kind of replacing a lot of the laminate floors out there, which when I built in 2004, we put in this really nice cherry wood looking laminate. And it was probably about the same price we paid just a couple of years ago to replace it with that LVP luxury vinyl plank. And it looks so much more realistic. It's more durable to water. It's a solid plastic material. It's not sawdust covered with a sheet of plastic. So moisture is less intrusive on it and less damaging. Solid wood to me is really only going in small spaces or high-end homes now, just simply because it's a little bit more expensive. It's, it'll take dog nails, gouges sliding matchbox cars, whatever the kids would be throwing across it. It's not as durable as luxury vinyl stuff anymore. And for the cost, I think you get a just as almost as good a looking product with luxury vinyl. Engineered wood floors were real popular to replace the price of a solid wood floor. And so those are still kind of a tongue and groove product, but they're like a plywood with a solid wood veneer on them. They can get a little bit of a resand and refinish out of them. Now, again, showing houses, I don't recommend you go start tearing up heat registers and things like that. But if you can sometimes just pull the floor register out and look at the edge. And if you see plywood versus a solid 1/2-inch plank of oak or maple or something like that, then you've got one of those engineered floor products that, you might get a light resanding and restaining out of it, but you're not going to pull a barrel sander out and go through and refinish that on a weekend. So most of your older homes, 30 years old and older, all have solid, if they've got any wood that hasn't been installed in recent years, it'd be a solid wood floor. And that's, you walk in and it's oak, right? I mean, it's a 50-year-old house, it's oak, it's pretty easy to tell what that looks like. So ceramic tile installation, again, if you don't know how to do ceramic tile, and there's a lot of components to that, including the layout of it, the geometric design, the cutting, the installation, the grouting. I see a lot of bad tile jobs out there because, again, people run to Home Depot. It's the one thing I think they think is really accessible to do, and it's an art form. It takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of precise measurement and a lot of detail work and a bad tile job. But the one thing that you can look out for is looking for cracks in tiles. If there's a cracked tile in a kitchen, a bathroom floor, it's probably they didn't use a proper, what we call substrate underneath it, which is your dense shield, fiberglass mat, hardy board, some sort of backing material that should be installed there. I've seen it where people just go right over the subfloor with their ceramic adhesive, and then lo and behold, guess what? You're going to get cracked tiles and moving. So this is a pretty good example of a cross section of an engineered wood floor here. It looks like plywood. This, you can actually see the tree rings here still in the solid wood floor. And you can see here the difference, like you get a little bit of a wear layer here. This is much greater. So when they talk about that wear layer, that's meaning you can sand that down a couple times and still refinish that. And then there's some examples. These are all laminate examples up here. I'm not sure I had really good, this is probably old enough there where there wasn't quite the selection of pictures for luxury vinyl stuff. So moving on to electrical systems. So the old method was to have knob and tube wiring with maybe fuses if you're lucky. And that's evolved into having copper wiring with different sizes and gauges of wiring, go to different rooms, breaker panels versus fuses. Again, we're not here to make you electricians, but if you walk into a house and you see a fuse box like this, where you have the little glass fuses that you screw in there, it's still safe. It still works, but not as safe as breaker panels. Be pointing this out to my buyers. Say, hey, look, this has a fuse box. These 4 fuses control the system of the house, as opposed to a breaker box that has 20 or 30 breakers in it. Now, breaker panel looks like this, should have a main shutoff. If it doesn't, that's something that can come back on an inspection. Nobody's going to shut the house down or not be able to move in if it doesn't have one. But it's always a good idea to have a main shutoff and then your other breakers here. One thing to keep an eye out for, homes built in the 60s and 70s. Again, we're not making you electricians here, but this is just what I've learned over the years. If you see what this Stablock breaker panel here, or these orange fuses or breaker switches with numbers on the end of them, or the words Federal Pacific on there anywhere. That's a company that if they were still in business today, this product would have been recalled for safety issues a long time ago. And the problem with it is they don't trip under a heavy load, which means they just don't work. And so that's a fire hazard. I haven't seen a ton of these lately. I think, the farther we get away from the decades that they use these, the more likely that they're going to be gone. It's kind of like lead paint, but you still see a few of these out. Homes built in late 50s, early 60s, maybe early 70s may still have some of these. Again, in this environment where it's a seller's market, very unlikely you're going to ask the seller to replace this, but it could be hey, you should probably budget at least $1,500 with your buyers, after you buy the house to replace this. So, and it would come back on an inspection report too, or it should. So, with wiring, so the old way was knob and tube. Again, we're not having you pull switches and dig into electrical systems, but so you understand when an inspection report comes back, you have 2-wire and 3-wire systems in the current modern breaker world. And so if you look at a breaker panel, if we go back here, you can look at the top of these breakers where the wires go in. And if there's white plastic or yellow plastic sleeves on the wires, or the insulation looks modern versus a gray woven fabric, it's probably a 3-wire system. If you've got that gray woven fabric around your wire, it's probably a 2-wire system. And the 3rd wire is simply a ground. You can still plug a computer into a 2-wire system. But what a lot of people have done over the years is they'll put a 3-wire plug onto a 2-wire system, and it's still not effectively grounded. So, and there's ways around that. You can install a ground fault interrupt breaker. You can go in and ground the system, or just replace the outlets with two-prong outlets versus 3-prong. Again, it's not our job to say don't worry about it. It's our job as agents to help explain the risks of it. In this environment, I don't think anybody's getting those repairs done. We've had them done in the past. Some insurance companies won't insure homes with knob and tube wiring. I'm kind of in the mindset of like, hey, the house has been there for 100 years with knob and tube wiring and it hasn't burned down yet, but not for me to argue with the insurance company about, and realize that you may have to go to a different insurance company. You may have to upgrade some electrical systems and some wiring in a house, because it is not the safest way to wire a house. Obviously, it's evolved since then. So if you're up in an attic or in a basement, you may even see some of that old knob and tube wiring. Some of it's decommissioned, some of it's actually still active. It's a good thing, good idea to have the inspector weigh in on that as well. And then you have aluminum wiring. So back in, I think, the 40s, and this may have even been a World War II era thing, but as recently, I think it's the 60s, they used aluminum for wiring. And the problem with that is it's brittle. And so you see, they don't like it where it joins to switches or junctions. Doesn't mean you have to rewire the whole house. Again, there's ways around it. They make adapters. They make little crimp-on adapters that you can then plug into the switches. And so it's time consuming. It's a little expensive, but it is probably a good repair to have done. Again, if I walk into a house, very hard for me to tell you whether the wiring is aluminum or not, unless I really see some exposed wiring, in which case they have some other hazards to worry about as well. So, if you see or smell sparks, smoke, things like that during a showing. Same thing with gas leaks. If you smell a gas leak, call the listing agent right away, because anything that's could burn down the house or blow up the house right now should be brought to the attention of the homeowner right away. If it's just good professional courtesy. But walking into a house, you're not going to really know where the electric works or not as long as it's on. So that's more for the inspector to tell you what's going on.
Have you ever had a experience with like electrical or like breakers or anything? I mean, as far as somebody who's buying a house, right? They have the inspection, and if they'll probably is when they're going to figure out about all this. But like, has there ever been a time, I guess, where I don't know, even now in this market, I think about all the time with people waiving inspection, right? And all these old houses have this like noggin tube, wiring. Like, has that ever backfired on any of your clients?
No, a lot of them will do the upgrade later. There's a time where if we get that Federal Pacific box, when you had the luxury of negotiating a sale coming out of inspections, you'd ask for, either a seller concession of, 1,000 or 1,500 bucks for a new electrical service, or have it done prior to close.
Gotcha.
But in this environment, with the sellers holding all the leverage, a buyer's afraid to ask for anything. And so,
Right.
but again, it's our job to make sure they can get the home inspected. And again, if we're in an environment where we feel we have to waive inspections, you didn't hear this from me, but sometimes it's done. And you should never replace your knowledge or what you're showing an agent for an inspection and say, hey, I've pointed out these 5 things. I think this is it. I think you can waive inspections. You should never have that conversation with a buyer. But if they're going to waive inspections and they're just of the mindset that that's what they have to do, and they're willing to do that, pointing things out to them can't hurt, right? It's just that it carries a little level of responsibility in how you present the information. So
I got you. So pretty much as long as an agent, you're kind of obviously always suggesting the inspection, right?
Yeah, because it's not, and again, I mean, my knowledge level as a licensed builder probably goes a little bit beyond the average agent.
Right.
I've torn homes apart, rebuild them from the studs out. I know building components. I've done this stuff. I'm willing to take that risk as an agent that doesn't have that experience level. And even I will tell you, that's a risk for me, to even say those things, because like I said,
that's what I'm thinking, because it can always fall back, right? They always be like, oh, well, Jason told me not to do it, right? And then they're
right. So yeah, we never tell people not to do anything, right? I mean, it's always, you should be doing this, or you should have this looked at, or this is what I'm seeing. This is my experience with it in the past. I can tell you that, the inspection report comes back and it'll say this, and, this is kind of where I would estimate the cost to be, but we'd want you to talk to a professional and get to confirm all that. So, and that's just always good verbiage in any of those conversations to have. So, but as far as siding components go, brick, aluminum, there was a day, I think it's still probably fairly relevant, where you could actually get enough in scrap value from pulling the aluminum siding off your house to pay for the new material if you're going to put it up in vinyl. And then there's the, I don't want to say new, I mean, it's been around for 10, 15 years now, a cement board siding, hardy board, and then traditional wood, which is becoming a little more scarce even. So, and there's different styles. I have people come into town and, from other parts of the country, and they're like, oh, do you have any brick houses with Chicago brick? And I'm like, well, what is Chicago brick? It's like, there's different styles and types of brick. You can dig into this, as much as you want. The thing you want to know when you're looking at siding is looking for deterioration on any of these. If you're looking at brick, siding, chimneys, things like that, and you're seeing what's called spalling, where there's chunks of brick falling off, it usually means there's gaps in the mortar, water's getting in, freezing and thawing and popping the face of those bricks off. If you see a ton of that, or a bunch of holes in the mortar joints, probably going to need some repair, and tuck pointing, hiring a mason to tuck point all those mortar joints is not cheap. Aluminum siding has its ups and downs. It's dentable. It is paintable, which is nice. But you can't just run right out to Lowe's and pick up 3 pieces of aluminum siding if you need to replace it. And so, put your 7th grade junior on the lawnmower for the first time, and he's throwing rocks and hitting the side of the house, and it's all dented and banged in. There is some expense to fix that as well. Vinyl, again, matching vinyl is tough. Vinyl sits in the sun for 10 years, and same thing, weed whipper, lawnmower throws a rock into it, you got to replace it. So, just an observation of this type and style of siding that it is on the outside, and that it's in good condition. Ground contact is always a good thing to pay attention to too. Make sure there's some distance between the soil and any wood siding. Windows, you have single pane, double pane, and then double hung windows. And so again, we're not trying to make you window experts here, but a single pane window, if you look, single pane of glass, pretty self-explanatory. With double pane windows, you have what's called fogging now in between those. So they have this thermal efficiency of sealed airspace between two panes of glass. Well, if those seals break, moisture gets in there, and there's condensation. That's something that I would point out to a buyer. It's pretty fail safe that just saying, hey, this window, the seal's blown on it. If you see a lot of frosted effect from that, it's like etching on there versus just moisture in there, that's probably going to be a glass replacement, not just a seal fix on those windows. Because part of what they do is they put a thin layer of metal in there for that thermal efficiency from a reflection standpoint. And what that does is once moisture gets in there, it corrodes, it basically rusts in there. And so that's when you get that frosted effect on there. A double pane window is obviously typically more expensive to replace than a single pane window. If you have storms and screens on a single pane window, older home with wood sash, there's maintenance that goes along with those. Make sure the screens and storms are in place and operable. Again, not your job to inspect the house, but if you observe that there's no storm windows on single pane glass, you might point that out just from a value standpoint. And then a double hung window, if you're on a second floor house, the top slides down or tips in so you can actually reach the outside and clean it without having to get on a ladder on the outside of the house. Again, it's okay to open a window here and there. I wouldn't go through and open every window. I wouldn't go through and, double check, because we had that house on Philadelphia and one of the little plastic anti-slide preventer things, so somebody can't, pop it open from the outside, was broken off and laying on the floor. So somebody started jamming on the windows in there. Seller didn't really appreciate it, but screens are something that are easily fixed. If they're not around, you can actually have screens built. They make screen kits at Lowe's. Done that before. You get into big sliding glass windows, you get into sliding glass doors, things like that for patios. Those are expensive to replace. Look at the wood around them. If they're wood clad, make sure that's not rotted out. You get some of these older sliders on these houses built in the 70s, and the wood's rotted and it's probably going to need to be replaced. So, so that's kind of an intro to housing components. We kind of run through stuff fast. Again, just kind of recap. You got the foundation, different types of foundations, different framing types, different build types. Then you have the components of the house, the HVAC, the furnace, the air conditioning, the roofing. And one thing that I don't have in here, and I don't know why, I thought my finished product did have it, and I've got some blank slides in here. I'm going to have to touch this up. We didn't talk about was plumbing. So you have different types of plumbing too. So you go into these older houses pre-19, probably 60, maybe 1950, you had galvanized steel as your supply lines. Those are easily corroded. Then they went to copper. And then now you have the new PEX material, PVC, lighter, cheaper, plastic-based stuff that's easier to work with. I've plumbed a house with both copper and PVC, replacing galvanized before. The new stuff, the PEX, unbelievably easy to work with compared to, having to sweat old copper lines and stuff like that. So you couldn't pay me enough to work on galvanized. If I see galvanized plumbing, I just call plumber, because that's it's not even anything I want to do. So, and again, just things to point out, like if you're in a house, turn on the kitchen sink, see what the water pressure is. Those old galvanized lines, they corrode easier on the inside. Sometimes the water flow gets that shale built up in there. It's okay to look under a kitchen sink and see what kind of plumbing is coming out of there. If you see, again, do-it-yourselfer projects from a plumbing perspective, like electrical, everybody, thing about plumbing is probably not going to kill you if you do it wrong, where electrical can, basement might flood, you might be, set back a few $1,000s, but nobody's going to drown unless, somebody's sleeping in the basement and the whole basement floods or something. So, but it's still expensive if it's done wrong. And so if you see like pipes that don't head the right direction from a drainage standpoint, they're heading uphill instead of downhill, probably not a good thing. One of the things that you look out for is the old, I call it mobile home plumbing, but it's PVC, like you'd use it in a drain line, only it's smaller size for supply lines. And you see, a lot of purple goop on the joints and improper hanging, and somebody, plumbed it themselves before PEX came out. And that's just, not good stuff. And so you may point that out to a buyer as well if you see PVC plumbing and something that doesn't look right. Because again, it's going to need to be fixed if it's not done right. Sometimes it's better to buy old stuff and have it done right the first time than go back and have to tear somebody else's projects out and start over. So, but I don't know. I think I'm missing a few pages on plumbing here or something, because I had them here, but we'll have to touch that up, I guess. So
My house had the old cast iron pipes.
Yep. Taking a few of those out from the floor up, you get a rubber sleeve and join it with some PVC. It's actually kind of fun using those chain breakers. I don't know if you've taken them out or not, but
the plumbing ones to clear out a pipe.
No, this actually cuts the cast iron.
Oh, okay.
You can rent them at Home Depot and they wrap a chain around it, and then you just keep tightening it, and it just kind of and it's just a little bladed chain thing, and it just sits there and cuts right through that old cast iron.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, kind of fun to do. You see a lot of do-it-yourself stuff with plumbing where they use, it's funny, they can't figure out the traps or whatever, and they start using flex pipe or rubber gasket joiners and stuff. And so it kind of can be a nightmare. I've always felt like HVAC, ductwork, plumbing, there's got to be a simpler way than whatever they developed. I get it, there's standards and certain things that they do, but there's certainly a way to make connectors and junctions and those things a lot easier. But sometimes again, time is money, right? Hiring a professional to come in and knock something out in an hour that takes you 3 days and 6 trips to Home Depot is
Right.
Fortunately, I live close enough to Lowe's where it's only 10 minutes away. I can run back down there, but that, or you just buy everything in the store and then take it all back when you're done. That's the other method. Yeah. So that's kind of building components. Again, kind of important to know what you're selling. We're not making you building engineers, inspectors, or contractors today, but just, things to keep an eye out for when you're going through. So, yeah. But I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then we're going to stop recording here.
With the siding, have you ever like scrapped aluminum siding, or has somebody who's done it?
I haven't. Like I said, back in the day when metal prices were real high,